Hello and welcome to your first chess lesson, you chess beginner. Well done for taking the plunge. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to have a look at the chessboard and we're going to think about how three of the pieces move. And then in next videos we'll go through how all the other pieces move, then we'll look at the idea of checkmate, and then we'll look at the different parts of a game of chess, and then how to win, how to beat your dad at chess. Okay, so we've got here on the screen a chessboard set up and ready to go. Now, chess is a two-player game, and there's the black pieces and the white pieces, and you must remember that the white pieces always start first, and you take it in turns to take a move until one side captures the other side's king. But more about that later. This is how the board looks when you start a game, and as you can see, there's 32 pieces on the board, but we'll want to start by thinking about the chessboard itself. So I'm just going to get rid of all the pieces on the board there, and as I go through this video, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'm going to pause for a little bit after I've asked you the questions, so try and get the answer in your head before I give you the answer. And it's really important in chess to think, so make sure you think about the answers before I tell you the answers. So here's the board. So the first question is, how many squares are on this chessboard? Now, hopefully, you have thought, well, there's eight squares along the bottom, and 8 squares along the side, and 8 times 8 is 64. So there's 64 squares on a chessboard. So this is the battleground. This is where the battle of chess happens. The battleground, the battle never spills out of the chessboard. The battle is all on the chessboard. And this is one of the things which I really love about the game of chess, is it's contained. My thinking and my understanding of chess, my world of chess, is trapped within these 64 squares. And however much I hate my opponent when I'm playing them on those 64 squares, however much I want to pound them into obliteration on these 64 squares, that never spills out of these 64 squares. I'm always kind and respectful to my opponent. Have a look at the chessboard again and think about what colour the squares are. Now, some of you, in answer to that question, in your brain, you might have thought, well, the squares are black and white, Mr. Stanier. We all know that chess is played on a black and white board, but actually, if you look carefully, they're not black and white, are they? These ones are kind of a beige and a more of a coffee brown colour. And if you look at lots of chessboards, so the one behind me, for example, is green and beige. And in tournaments, the players play on quite often brown and beige boards as well. And this is because if you play on a black and white board with black and white pieces, actually it's a real strain on your eyes. So most chessboards, even though we talk about black and white squares, they're actually a darker colour and a lighter colour. Is there anything else you notice about the chessboard apart from the colour of the squares and how many squares there are? Some of you have probably noticed the fact that all the squares have coordinates. So along the bottom we have the letters A to H, and along the left-hand side we have the numbers 1 to 8. So each square on a chessboard has a name, has a reference. So this square here, for example, is A1, and this square here is B1. This square here is A3. This square here is G4. What's this square here? That's D6. And this square here That's e3. And this square here, that's h8. So when we talk about our chess moves and which squares we're putting our pieces on, we can write down and communicate with other people, even without a chessboard, to say what our moves were. So for example, if we moved our queen to this square, we would say queen to d5. If we moved our bishop to this square, we would say bishop to f7. So it's very good when you start learning to play chess to start thinking about describing your moves in words, and the more that you can write down the moves that you take, the better it can be. So there's the chessboard, our battleground. Now there's the battleground. Let's bring in our army. So here we have the two armies facing each other. And you'll see that if you look at the white pieces here, that the white pieces have a row of pieces which we call pawns at the front, P-A-W-N-S. And then we have some different pieces here. So we have these pieces in the corner. These are called the rooks. You might also call them castles because they look a bit like castles, but the proper chess name is a rook. We then have the knights. You might call them a horse or a horsey because they look like horses, but chess players call them knights. I don't know where that knight went. And we have we'll just put it's all going wrong now. We'll just put that knight there, and we'll put the rook back there. There we go. Bit of a computer problem. And we have here these two pieces. These pieces here are called bishops. So these two be called bishops. And then in the centre two squares we have the royalty. So we have the king and we have the queen. So we're going to start thinking about how three of these pieces move: the rook, the bishop, and the queen. And they move the same way if you're playing black pieces or white pieces. So we'll start thinking first about the rook. So here is what the piece looks like in 3 dimensions. And the rook starts in the bottom left-hand corner and the bottom right-hand corner of the board. Now the rook can move as many squares as it wants, horizontally or vertically. So if you choose to move your rook, you could move it from here to here, or you could move it from here to here, or you could move it from here to here, or you could move it from here to here. You can't move it from here to here. That's not a legal move. You can't move your rook like that. If there's an enemy piece in the way, sorry, a few technical difficulties here, such as this pawn. So if this pawn is here, now what we can do now is that we can actually go and we can capture that pawn. So as one move, we could move our rook to the square that the pawn is on and stop there, and then you capture the enemy's pawn. So if the rook starts here, for example, and there is a knight there, then the rook can come and capture the knight. If there was a bishop here, then the rook could come along and capture the bishop. If there was a knight here, though, for example, the rook couldn't capture it because the rook can't move diagonally. It can only move horizontally or vertically. So there we are. So that is how a rook moves. So let's just have a little think about the power of the rook. Now, the rook's really powerful because, as you can see, this rook, if it's here, can can cover a huge number of squares. It can dominate lots of areas, and it can move a long, long way. It can also move to any square on the chessboard in just 2 moves if it's not blocked. So if, for example, the rook wanted to move to b4, it could do so in 2 moves. Can you see those 2 moves? Have a little look and think about it. So there are actually 2 ways that you could do this. The rook could first of all move down here to g4, and then could move across to b4. That's one way of doing it. If you thought of that, well done. The other way of doing it, was it b4 we're talking about? Yes, it was. The other way of doing it is to move to b6, and then to move down to b4. So there we are. So let's have a little think about that again. So if this rook here wanted to move to g8, this square up here, in just 2 moves, can you see how it would do it? So there are 2 ways that this can be done again. So the rook could move up to b8 and across to g8. Alternatively, the rook could move across to g4 and then up to g8. And so that is how the rook moves. Let's now look at our second piece we're going to look at today, and this is the bishop. So it's got a pointy hat, just like a bishop in a cathedral, and it's represented often on two-dimensional chessboards by this character here. So the bishops, and you get 2 bishops when you all technical issues, 1 second. You get 2 bishops when you start a game of chess, and one of the bishops is on a black square. Now the bishop can only move diagonally. So this black bishop here can move any of these squares between c1 and h6, and can move from any of the squares c1 to a3, so going diagonally across the board. This white bishop here can go from f1 and can go on any square all the way up to a6, and from f1 up to h3. Now, if you think about how the bishops move, so if you go back to the bishop on the c square, if the bishop moves to c3, for example, on its next move it might want to move to b6, then on its next move it might want to move to e5, and then it might want to move to g7, and so on. And you see that wherever it moves to, it will always land on a dark coloured square on the chessboard, on a black square. So even though these are the pieces for white, this is known as white's black bishop because it can only go on the black squares. So if we look at the white's white bishop, this might go diagonally here to d3, and then might go diagonally here to g6, and then diagonally here to e8, and so on. And wherever it goes to, it will always stay on a white square. So this is known as white's white bishop. So both black pieces and white pieces have black and white bishops. Now again, the bishops can capture pieces diagonally. So if we have a pawn here, for example, then you can capture it by moving the bishop to where that pawn is, land on its square, and you've captured that piece. the bishop has to stop there, just like the rook has to stop. It can't carry on its journey. It stops when it captures. So if there's a rook, for example, on b5, then this bishop can capture the rook there. So just a few things to think about with this. So if we have our white bishop and our black bishop here, and if we put a knight on e5, can you think about how one of our bishops can capture this knight in 2 moves? So what 2 moves could one of the bishops do to take this knight? Have a little think about it just for a minute. So hopefully you've already realised that this bishop here, your white bishop, can never capture the knight on e5. Wherever this poor bishop goes, it will never be able to capture that knight. So we need to move the bishop on b6. So to capture the knight on b6, there are 2 moves that you could, 2 ways to do this. The first way would be to move the bishop first to c7 and then to move it onto e5 and capture the knight. The second way would be to move the bishop to d4 and then capture the knight on e5. So that is how the bishop moves. Now the final piece we're going to look at today is the most powerful piece on the board, but not the most important piece on the board, the most powerful piece on the board, and that is the queen. And the queen, she starts the game on her own colour on the back row. So the black queen starts opposite the white queen. And you don't think about this, but a queen likes to have a nice white dress on, and to match her nice white dress, she likes to have nice white shoes. So what's happening at her feet? The white square on the board is the same as what's happening to her dress, what she's wearing. So the queen always starts on her own colour. And the queen is effectively a combination of how a rook moves and how a bishop moves. So a queen can move the same as a rook and a bishop. So the queen here can move horizontally, just like a rook, and vertically, just like a rook. It can also move diagonally, just like a bishop. So you can see why the queen is seen as such a powerful piece on the board, because from this one square she can move to lots of different other squares on the chessboard. And of course, if there's other pieces on these squares, then she can take them. So she can move diagonally there, she can then move vertically here, and she can then move diagonally there to take the pawn. So there's lots of different ways that the queen can move in order to really cause deadly impact on the enemy. However, if you get a little bit too brutal with your queen and she gets captured by the enemy, then really you've lost the game and you might as well give up. So that's the queen. She can move like a rook horizontally, and she can move vertically and she can move diagonally. So let's just have a little think about this. So I'm going to put some pieces on the board. And what I would like you to think about is I'd like you to think about what route the queen will take in order to capture all of these pieces. Okay, so in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves, this queen is going to capture all 5 pieces. So have a little think about how this queen is going to capture those 5 pieces. I'll give you a minute or so to think about that. If you've thought about that and you think you know the answer, then now might be a good time to write down how that queen will move. So you put Q for queen, and then you write down the square that you think the queen should move to. Then the second move, you'd write Q for queen, and the second square you think she should move to, and so on. So just jot down the answers if you've worked it out. Right, let's see how you got on. So think about this. So if you look at all of these pieces, if you look at this piece here, the pawn, the queen moving diagonally can't take that pawn and can't take it moving horizontally either. If you look at this bishop here, the queen can't take that diagonally or vertically. This pawn here, queen misses if it goes diagonally. If we look at this rook, then the queen can move and capture that. So if you've written this down, you should have written Q G2 or Q, and we use an X to show it takes a piece. So you could put Q X G2, but if you Q G2, well done. So the first move is Q G2, taking the rook here. The next move you might think is to B2 here. But if we do that, look what happens. So if we go to B2, the next piece it can take is either the pawn here or the bishop here. So let's say if we go to the bishop here and then take this bishop here, from this square here, we can't take this black pawn on G7. So actually the right move from queen to G2 is to take the pawn here on G7. Then from G7, the only option is to come and take the pawn on B2. And then from B2, we go to B8. And from B8, we go to C8. Should we have another quick go at that? So we'll get rid of those pieces. We'll put a queen. Let's put a black queen on the board this time. There we are. And so we'll put a piece here, then we'll put a piece here, then we'll put a there, then we'll put that there, and then we'll put that there. So just have a little think about this one. 5 pieces in 5 moves. Okay, and this is the answer. If you don't have the answer, you might want to press pause until I want to give the answer. But otherwise, here's the answer. So the first move is queen to f3, or queen takes f3 here. The second move is queen diagonally up here to a8, so queen takes a8. The next move is the vertical move here to the other knight. So queen takes a6, then moves across horizontally to capture this pawn here. So queen takes h6, and then the queen comes down here to take d2 here. So it would be take, take, take. Oh, didn't move it quite far enough. Take, take. There we are. So there you have it. We have looked at how the rook moves horizontally and vertically. We've looked at how a bishop moves, so diagonally. We've looked at how pieces can take other pieces, so just bear with me, computer issues. So we've seen how pieces can capture other pieces by moving onto their square and stopping, and we've seen how the queen can move just like a bishop and a rook combined, and can move horizontally, vertically and diagonally as far as she wants. What I'll do is I'll put up on OneNote as well a few little exercises for you to do to embed this learning, and what we'll do next week is we'll look at how some of the more complex pieces move, the knights and the pawns and the king, and we'll look at what this strange thing called checkmate actually is. Enjoy playing a few games of chess. If you can do a little bit of practice, that is great, but otherwise I will see you next week.